in your book on Area 51, you propose an explanation that I think some people have criticized at the very end, that this might have been a disinformation campaign from, I guess, Stalin, that the Roswell incident was a remotely piloted plane with a, quote, grotesque child-sized aviator. Just looking back at all that now, years later, what's the probability that it's true? What's the probability it's not?
So I've never revealed who that source is. Did you
Yes,
know that?
I know
Want
you
me to tell
haven't.
you?
With the source.
Yeah.
Okay, who's the source?
So before I say anything on that, let me speak to the question that you asked, right? So you asked me, what's the probability that that is still standing as an idea
Mm-hmm.
14 years later, right? So I continued to work with that source for years afterwards. We talked about this. Look, I mean, his whole family knew it was him. And I knew his family because I was an integral part of, I was at his house, met all his kids, grandkids. And
And we should say the source is the main expert advisor behind the story. That it was, maybe you can explain what the story is that you report in the book, that it was a disinformation campaign created by Stalin to cause mass hysteria in the United States.
yes,
The very kind that we've been speaking about with the CIA and so on.
yes, predicated on the narrative of the War of the Worlds, right? And the War of the Worlds, when it was a radio program in the United States, made people go crazy. Oh my God, we're being invaded by aliens. Well, the government was always interested in this story, and Joseph Stalin was too. We know that from declassified documents, right? And so the source told me that the reason for this program and that the real Roswell crash remains were, in fact, it was a black propaganda hoax infiltrated, or rather predicated at this idea that you were going to overwhelm America's early warning air defense system, cause mayhem, and maybe be able to attack the United States. That was the plan. And Stalin was also messing with the United States, messing with Truman, who sort of, turned his back on him, right, at Potsdam. And so this idea was, and the reason that the source is important, and unlike, a lot of people, I saw this, I saw that, I learned that, was according to the source, once it was determined that this was a hoax and that Stalin was able to get a craft over the United States and it crashed, and it had, people inside of it. They were people that were sort of deformed and meant surgically altered to look like aliens. The United States government decided that it needed to know what on earth that was all about, and if it was possible for us to have the same program. This according to the source, right? And so it sounds preposterous. And if it was just someone saying, you might say, well, it's ridiculous, tell me, and get them onto another subject. But the difference is this source, who is very well placed and friends with all of the other 75 people, told me this as a confession, right? A real tearful confession, because what he said is he was involved in the American program to do the same thing. And people died because there were human experiments that went on. And I write about this in the last 12 pages of Area 51. It was an explosive, revelation. And I felt very confident in writing this because the source wanted it written. Why? Because he said, I'm dedicated to my country. I know about being committed to national security. And this kind of thing must never happen. And if you give people too much power, they will take advantage of it. And he wanted it on the record. And his wife of 60 years did not know until after the book published, nor did his children, okay? So after the book published, I was called to his house and sat there with his family. And they said, tell us this isn't true. And he said, it is true, right? Now that source is Al O'Donnell, who is the nuclear weapons engineer who armed, wired, and fired 186 nuclear weapons. Okay? So if you want to talk about someone, you're the first person I've told that on the record, but it's kind of about time.
His name was Richard D'Amato, and he worked for Senator Robert Byrd, and he oversaw black budget projects. And he got onto this UFO story from Whitley Strieber. And so he was assigned, find out what the deal is. So he went around the country, talked to different researchers, and came to me and wanted to know about Area 51 and Lazar. So I told him a story, and I told him about this guy. And he got permission for this guy to violate his security oaths and talk to him about it. And they had multiple conversations, and they went to the founders of EG&G, the company, and it became a dead end. But after that congressional inquiry, this guy completely changed his tune. So he made up this story, which is the one that you heard from Andy Jacobson, that what crashed at Roswell was a Russian technology, Nazi technology, flown by the Russians, containing little concentration camp victims who'd been experimented on by Dr. Mengele. Completely ridiculous, story. But I think he got scared. He was a real guy in a real position to know, and had shared with his family some of this information. I think the story that he told me was legit.
Couple of crash retrieval events in the late 30s and 40s. We know at the Trinity site in 1945, shortly after we detonated the first atomic bomb, there was a craft that was downed or came down in that area that we retrieved. But 1947 is the most celebrated one. That one, there were actually 3 extraterrestrial vehicles involved. We had we have a document, you'll see it in my book, Unacknowledged, which goes with the documentary Unacknowledged. When you see all these for free on Amazon Prime and whatever. But it describes a new radar system that we had put in. Now, at Roswell. Now, let me tell you a little bit about the sort of military speak here. A radar system, you and I think of it as just something that sends out a beam and it bounces off the skin of an aircraft and you trace it. Those systems can also have an active directional energy warfare system attached to it or associated with it, either within the system or very nearby. So then when something is painted or tracked on radar, it's then hit with an electromagnetic weapon, a directional weapon. Those were actually beginning to be experimented with in the 30s and 40s. By 1947, this FBI document from a field agent to J. Edgar Hoover, which we had published, states that system was switched on. And it obviously had more than just a radar component. It had to have an active electromagnetic weapon part of it. And there were 3 of these ET craft that were over that area. And I'll tell you why in a moment. 2 of them collided. One was in a bazillion pieces, not far from that Roswell Army Air Base. The other one continued westward near Socorro, impacted, and it broke. And there were extraterrestrial bodies and I know of one living ET taken from there. The third one wasn't found, I believe it's till 1951, up in the mountains going way northwest of Roswell, up in the mountains in New Mexico.
I mean, these girls came within 8 to 10 feet. Three women, Katya, 2 sisters, Liliani and Valkyria, 14, 16, and 21. They got within 8 to 10 feet in broad daylight of this creature. And one of the things that doesn't come across in the film, when they saw this thing, they're looking like, what are we looking at here? They're walking through this field, and it's up against a cinder block wall. And one of them was looking at it, what is that? And it was crouched by the wall. It was weak and feeble. And one of them kind of like screeched, like, what is that? And it turned, and it looked right at the girls, locked eyes on them. Liliana grabs her younger sister, who's 14, Valkyria, and hightails it out of there. Katya is 21. She's frozen in her tracks, locked eyes with this creature, and it's communicating with her. Please help me. It wants help. It's weak and it's feeble and it's scared, and it's crouched down. Liliani realizes that Katya is back there. She gets, 100 feet down the path. She leaves her sister, stay here, I'm going back to get Katya. She runs back. And I asked Katya, and I asked all the girls, During that moment of contact, when you lock eyes, I know it's only a brief second, but during that moment of contact, what did you feel? Like, put me there. That's where the title comes from, Moment of Contact, because that was when they locked eyes on this creature. And that's when Katya said, help me, I'm scared. And it was feeble and suffering. And it's a very powerful moment. And these girls have been saying the same thing. The mother, it's the first time I'd ever reported on these so-called like men in dark suits that show up and intimidate witnesses. Honestly, I've been hearing about those cases for so many times, but I've avoided them because it's got so much baggage from men in black. It's just ridiculous. I just didn't even want to be associated with it. But I'd heard it. I can go on until I'm blue in the face. I go until tomorrow morning with the amount of cases, with generals too. But this time, when the mother said that these men showed up and tried to get the daughters to say they were lying and offered her a briefcase full of $100 bills.
To begin with, we have this concept of the people from other planets as little green men. Are they green from what you know? Are they all the same, or we got different kinds of them?
George, there's at least 70 different species, and probably more. But yes, as odd as it sounds, there are little green men. That's not the ones we usually see, though. We see the little gray ones. They're about 4.5 feet tall. And we see the ones that are called the Nordics. They're about 7 feet tall, look like us, but they're invariably blonde hair and blue-eyed. They're one of the species that we have on ice. One of their crashes we recovered.
Obviously, with different species, they have different motives. I mean, are there good aliens and bad aliens from what you know?
Good aliens and bad aliens and all kinds of ways and reasons for interacting with us.
And what are some of the reasons? Why would they be here?
Genetic experiments, trying to, there's a misconception here. People think that our space brothers would bring us, good things and teach us how to get rid of all our diseases. And, if you stop and think about it, that may not be the best thing, because if you had a society without any disease and everybody starts living 150 years, that creates a lot of problems. So they would not meddle in that way.
Do you understand the implications of disclosure? And I said, I'm not really giving it too much thought. Why? He goes,
meaning the implications of disclosure.
If this story really came out.
Okay.
So I was like, and to be honest with you, yeah, sure, I guess I thought about it. I mean, it didn't seem like that big of a deal to me. We're not alone. Great. You know what I mean?
Right. Thought about thinking about it every day.
I don't think anybody just thinks that we're alone in the universe anymore anyway, but
right.
You're coming here. He said, I just need to really emphasize this to everybody out there so you understand what I'm telling you. I'm not saying I believe what I'm about to tell you, okay? I need to see more evidence. I'm not saying I don't believe it,
right? But
I don't just believe something because someone told me that. I need to see supporting evidence. I need to hear testimony. I need a lot more. What's taken me as long as it has with all the other cases that I investigate. I don't just believe a case. Okay, so Robert Bigelow said to me, they're walking among us. I said, what do you mean they're walking among us? He said, they're walking among us. They live right here, kind of thing. So again, I'm looking at him going, I need to see, and I'd like to see some proof of that.
Right.
But then he said, we've done studies. We've done extensive studies on the impacts of this story would have on the general population globally. And I said,
interesting.
Okay. Well, what kind of studies? He goes, well, you take Iran, Contra, and you take all these other super big scandals, and you multiply those, every one of them that's ever happened in the history of mankind, in modern history, and then you multiply that by 1 million, and that's the impact, according to our studies, that this reality would have on the general public. He said the economy would collapse, organized religion would collapse, and he just rattled off all that. Again, I'm not saying that I believe this. I'm just telling you what he said to me.
Oh, great. Yeah,
Okay,
so
which one do I want
paragraph
to read
6 right now. So if you want to scroll down to paragraph 6, there you go.
This summary of observations of aerial phenomenon has been prepared for the purpose of re-emphasizing and reiterating the fact that the phenomena have continuously occurred in the New Mexico skies during the past 18 months and are continuing to occur. And secondly, that these phenomena are occurring in the vicinity of sensitive military and government installations.
And if you wanted to go back to like paragraph 2, there you go.
The highlighted part?
Yeah, the observers of.
The observers of those phenomenon include scientists, special agents of the Office of Special Investigations, the U.S. Air Force, airline pilots, military pilots, Los Alamos security inspectors, military personnel, and many other persons of various occupations whose reliability is not questioned.
And now scroll to the top of the very top of that document. And that
it says that it was determined above that. The summary of observations of aerial phenomenon in the New Mexico area, December 1948 to May 1950.
And the date of that document, if you scroll a little bit higher, you are going to see the date of that memo.
1950.
Yes, sir.
May 25th, 1950.
Right.
It says that it was determined that the frequency of unexplained aerial phenomena in the New Mexico area was such that an organized plan of reporting these observations should be undertaken.
Right.
So this is the beginning of Project Blue Book.
So this is the recognition that we have a serious problem over our sensitive military installations. This is nothing new. This is not 1970s reverse engineered technology or some sort of special technology.
1950, they're talking about
we
this.
We had just broken the sound barrier, and we had not yet entered into space. And we have these things that are performing in ways that, frankly, we can't replicate. I've brought a few more of these later on to emphasize that point you just brought up at some point if you're interested.
Yeah.
But it highlights that these are official government documents through official government personnel raising the alarm bells, just like we did in OSAP and ATIPS. And so this is nothing new. Now, if you want to look at this from an adversarial perspective, our government has already said that's not ours. Right. If you look at a 1950 Sabre jet, for example, it wasn't even supersonic. And yet these things that we are observing in some cases are doing, I brought some more documents here, multiples of Mach and doing velocities and doing things that we frankly could not do back then. And frankly, we still can't do in some cases. But temporally speaking, the only two countries in the world may have a chance of doing something like that would be Russia and China. And now in 1950, where was China? It was in the middle of a famine at the time. And where was Russia? Russia was trying to develop the atomic bomb and still was using horse-drawn carts for a lot of their military operations. So
the Fermi paradox of where are the aliens? You've got these sort of great filters. Like, it's just like, why have we not heard from the aliens? Now, a lot of people think there are aliens among us. I often claim to be one. Nobody believes me, but it did say alien registration card at one point on my immigration documents. So I've not seen any evidence of aliens. So it suggests that at least one of the explanations is that intelligent life is extremely rare. And again, if you look at the history of Earth, civilization has only been around for 1/1,000,000th of Earth's existence. So if aliens had visited here, say 100,000 years ago, they would be like, well, they don't even have writing, just hunter-gatherers basically. So, so how long does a civilization last? So for SpaceX, the goal is to establish a self-sustaining city on Mars. Mars is the only viable planet for such a thing. The moon is close, but it lacks resources, and I think is probably vulnerable to any calamity that takes out Earth. The moon is too close; it's vulnerable to a calamity that takes out Earth. So, I'm not saying we shouldn't have a moon base, but Mars would be far more resilient. The difficulty of getting to Mars is what makes it resilient. In going through these various explanations of why don't we see the aliens, why one of them is that they failed to pass these great filters, these key hurdles, and one of those hurdles is being a multi-planet species. So if you're a multi-planet species, then if something were to happen, whether that was a natural catastrophe or a man-made catastrophe, at least the other planet would probably still be around. So you're not like, you don't have all the eggs in one basket. And once you are sort of a two-planet species, you can obviously extend life paths to the asteroid belt, to maybe to the moons of Jupiter and Saturn, and ultimately to other star systems. But if you can't even get to another planet, definitely not getting to star systems.
Roswell. Now I know your audience is going to say, Roswell's been beaten to death. And, well, how about this? Let's say that a murder took place, even though it's 80 years ago or 75 years ago. Does that make it like, oh, well, so much time's passed, let's not worry about it? No. And the reason why Roswell is so relevant that most people don't understand is that you had the 509th Bomb Squadron, the most elite squadron, hand-select unit in the world, exclusively responsible for the deployment of atomic weapons, announced that they recovered a flying saucer. That's a fact. Okay? Then they recant and say, oh, terribly sorry. It was just a common everyday weather balloon. Jesse Marcel, the first person at the debris field with Mac Brazel, and thank you, Don Schmidt and Kevin Randall, for all your work. We wouldn't talk about this if it hadn't been for them, and Stanton Friedman. Mac Brazel takes Marcel and another guy, intelligence officer, out to the debris field. Mac Brazel says the material was clearly not of Earth origin. I know weather balloons inside and out. He described the material like tin foil that you crumple it up and it regains its thing. These I-beams that are purple with hieroglyphic writings, things of that nature. He takes it back to his son, who I met, Jesse Marcel Jr. I knew him well. Went on Larry King with the guy a bunch of times. He described the same material that he handled personally in his hands, okay? The press conference they had with Colonel DuBose, Roger Ramey, and Jesse Marcel, 2 out of 3 of those went on the record on camera, said the original story was true. That was the balloon story was a cover-up. Okay, you've got the FBI memo by J. Edgar Hoover in his own handwriting. He talks about in the SW case, could be Southwest, the Army grabbed it and wouldn't let us have it for cursory examination. That's pretty compelling. You've got Apollo 14 astronaut Edgar Mitchell, who just so happened to grow up in Roswell. And when he came back, or on the outskirts, and when he came back from his mission to the moon in the 70s, Apollo 14, 6th man to walk on the moon, he gets back and he knows all those ranchers, and those ranchers tell him, yeah, that was not of Earth origin. He's gone on the record saying this, and he also confirmed that his intelligence sources, he's an astronaut, he landed on the moon, told him that Roswell was real. So based on just that alone, that's extremely compelling. And I know that Sheila Widnall, the former Secretary of the Air Force in the 90s under the Clinton administration, she went after that case because Clinton went after that case. And they weren't happy with the answers they were getting. And then the Air Force comes up with Project Mogul. Well, if you look at Project Mogul is just exactly the same explanation as the first one, except it's a bunch of these balloons stringed together. Balsa wood, tinfoil, absolute baloney. If the Air Force really wanted to squash it, show us that material that the first-hand eyewitness testimony, the people that have gone on camera described, show us that material that crumples up from 1947. Show us those I-beams with hieroglyphics on them.
Can I stop you real
Sure,
quick?
absolutely.
The material that crumpled up, what's fascinating is it's exactly the same as what was described in the Virginia case.
Yes, that's what Carlos de Souza described, yes.
This material was light like aluminum foil. When you crumple it and let it go, it goes right back to its form.
Took back his shape, yes.